At the heart of Europe lies Switzerland. It's a surprisingly big little country. Small in area, but big on natural beauty. And like its many languages and cultures, its landscapes vary widely too. From mighty Alps and dense forests to mysterious moors and roaring waterfalls. Switzerland has many faces, some familiar, some hidden. It's a country that's astonishingly rich in variety, wilderness, and scenic wonder. Switzerland is also known as the moated castle of Europe. This description fits the Bernese Oberland uplands and surrounding region particularly well. Without the water supply from the Alps, Europe would be an empty desert. Millions of people would go thirsty. Huge swathes of agricultural land would be parched. Europe's largest rivers, the Rhine, Rhone, Danube, and Po, would dry up. Around 260 cubic kilometers of water flows down from the Alps every year, more than 5 times the volume of Lake Constance. The Swiss mountains play a key role. The melted snow, ice, and glaciers supply Europe with water. But the mountains also act as rain catchers. The humid air from the Atlantic collides with the massive wall of mountains, releasing its moisture in the form of precipitation. One of the most beautiful results of all this moisture is the mountain lakes. Some, such as the Bachalp Lake above Grindelwald, are covered with ice right through until summer. It's hard to find any life in these lakes. The water is too cold and the winters too long. And many of these areas are extremely isolated. Any passing waterfowl that might have a few fish eggs stuck in its feathers would hardly consider stopping here for a rest, which means that some of these lakes seem almost to be underwater deserts. Famously, the weather in these mountains can change within minutes. Grey skies, misty, damp air and rain doesn't exactly gladden most hearts, except for one rather special creature. The alpine salamander likes these conditions. It might be native to the Alps, but that certainly doesn't mean it's good at climbing. At 85% humidity level, these mainly nocturnal creatures will also venture forth during the day, and it can often seem to be raining salamanders. A salamander wanting to get back to its cave won't be put off by even the sheerest rock face. And another try. Nearly made it. Its sensitive skin, equipped with poisonous glands to protect it against predators, must be kept moist. That's why it's important that it reaches its shelter when the weather turns fine. Before the sun comes out, the salamanders disappear without a trace, only to reappear again when it rains. The Androsaci vandelii wait for sunshine and the insects that appear with it. Yellow blossoms signal to the bees, "I need pollinating." But pink ones say, "Fly on, there's nothing more to fertilize here." Alpine flowers need special strategies to survive the harsh conditions. This is one of the world's most famous flowers, the mythical alpine edelweiss. The typical sheen of the leaves around the bloom comes from tiny air bubbles that reflect the light, attracting insects and protecting the leaves from the strong, high-altitude ultraviolet rays. When the yellow bellflower blossoms, it's doomed. Some can grow for up to 10 years before they blossom once and then die. Fine hairs on alpine flowers protect them against the harmful UV light rays that are stronger in the mountains, as well as from dehydrating in the thin air and dry foehn winds. Not all gentians have blue flowers, but the intense color gives it a high sun protection factor, and as a positive spin-off for the plant, bees find the blue irresistible. The golden root needs neither other roseroot plants nor insects to reproduce. At a pinch, it will do so on its own. Another adaptation to the hardships of life in the high mountains. They look quite artless, these colorful alpine flowers, and yet they're absolute experts where it comes to sophisticated survival strategies. In Switzerland, these seemingly idyllic mountain pastures with farmhouses dotted about are simply called Alp. The cattle spend their summer here while their milk is converted into the renowned Alpine cheese. More than 100,000 dairy cows spend the Swiss summer on an Alp. Since the Bronze Age, farmers have been bringing their cattle to summer, as they call it, in the mountains. The lush green meadows, with their multitude of aromatic herbs, suggest a natural biotope, but appearances are deceptive. Alpine meadows are a man-made landscape. Without active cultivation and care, the forest would once again encroach and overrun the meadows. In some regions, the ground is too damp, and cows sink deep into the soil while grazing. Some farmers keep special cows. However formidable these creatures might look, Scottish Highland cattle are smaller and lighter than others of their species. They provide excellent meat, but unfortunately not very much milk. Here, on the Imbrigg Alp, these cows are on night duty. During the day, they are plagued by biting houseflies and horseflies, so they graze at night and go back into their cowshed in the morning. Everyone knows their place and what needs to be done.
Sonn auf den Bergen noch steht. Oh, wie sie Gletscher so rot. Oh, wie sie Gletscher so rot.
Even in summer, the more than 4,000-meter-high mighty giants in the Jungfrau region are covered with ice and snow. There are very few plants and animals that are able to survive here. The ptarmigan is a little like the chameleon of the mountains. In summer, its plumage takes on the color of the rocks. As autumn approaches, and with it early snowfalls, the first white feathers start to appear. Gradually, white as snow becomes the fashionable shade of the season. One might almost think that wallowing in the snow turns the birds white. In actual fact, the snow baths help to get rid of their itchy summer plumage. The birds' perfect adaptation to their surroundings is no surprise. They are relics from the Ice Age and have been as much a part of the Alps, and for as long, as many of its glaciers. In winter, the ptarmigan is to all intents and purposes invisible. It can be quite startling for unwary hikers to have a perfectly camouflaged ptarmigan suddenly rise up out of their path at the last moment and flap away. Ptarmigans generally spend the summer at over 3,000-meter altitudes. The temperatures up here on the Jungfraujoch saddle only climb above 0 degrees in the summer. But even in July, there are up to 18 days of frost, although these conditions are apparently not Arctic enough to put some birds off living here. The alpine chough can be found in the Asian highland Taklamakan desert region, as well as the Balkans, Pyrenees, and the northeast African Atlas Mountains. They can breed at altitudes of up to 3,800 meters. There's a very large colony of these birds on the Jungfraujoch, thanks to 1 million tourists and the remains of their picnics that get left behind. Three large ice streams flow together in confluence below the Jungfraujoch, forming a 900-meter thick ice shield. Alpine glaciers have been around for perhaps 2.5 million years, and though it's hard to imagine, these pictures clearly show the unthinkable. The eternal life of this ice mass is coming to an end. The ice has gradually retreated by over 100 meters since 1850. The cause is climate change, which affects Switzerland more than many other countries around the world. In the valley below, near Grindelwald, the effects of climate change can also be seen. At the foot of the Mettenberg, some bushes are clothed in a fine silk webbing. Many of these delicately silken-clad trees and bushes are also stripped clean. The ermine moth caterpillar has taken firm hold here. It loves warm, dry conditions, and climate change is greatly to its advantage. The extensive silk covering protects them against rain and hungry predators. None of this disturbs the affected trees. As soon as the caterpillars turn into butterflies and fly off, the trees sprout new leaves. The ichneumoniid wasp is the caterpillar's greatest natural enemy. With its long ovipositor, it deposits an egg inside a caterpillar. The wasp larva hatches and grows inside the caterpillar, devouring it alive. But if the silk is too thick, the parasitic wasp has no chance. Its ovipositor cannot pierce it. With the warmer climate here, these webs are more common and larger areas are affected. A more dramatic sign of climate change is demonstrated by the glaciers. There are around 5,000 glaciers across the Alps. After the oceans, they are the Earth's biggest water store. Glaciers store almost 3/4 of all the fresh water on the planet. Their weight distorts rocks and grinds down whole mountains. But they are shrinking. Since the mid-1800s, almost half the entire glacier surface of Switzerland has disappeared. In the summer of 1744, Swiss artist Caspar Wolf painted the lower Grindelwald glacier. Today, it has disappeared. The Geltenhorn Saddle and Gelten Glacier in the Lauenen Valley are today barely recognizable. All that's left of the massive ice shield and fern areas are only scanty snow patches. Entire mountain panoramas have been altered by global warming. Both the Grindelwald glaciers used to reach right down to the bottom of the valley. People used to sell the ice to cool food transported to Paris. In 2007, the glacial ice had melted quite far back. The valley floor was several hundred meters away. And today, from the valley, there is almost nothing to be seen of what was the massive Upper Grindelwald Glacier. The Black Lütschine River now flows where once, not long ago, the valley was filled with a thick mass of ice. Rock walls, ground smooth by the ice, bear witness to the old glacier. What was once one of Switzerland's foremost tourist attractions is no more than forgotten splendor. And there is no end to climate change in sight. It's estimated that in some 80 years, only the mightiest glaciers will be left. The cause is global warming. both natural and man-made. Compared to the others, the Stein Glacier in the Susten Pass is an absolute sprinter. In just 1 year, it has retreated by more than 150 meters, making it one of Switzerland's fastest disappearing glaciers. Before the meltwater escapes, it flows under the ice towards the valley floor, picking up pulverized rock along the way and emerging from the glacier's snout as glacial milk. Sometimes one can go right up to a glacier's terminus, though the constant risk of collapse makes this quite dangerous. Hikers who prefer not to end up like Ötzi the Iceman should keep their distance. The world beneath a glacier is ephemeral. These ice sculptures change constantly. It won't be long before they disappear completely. But the Stein Glacier doesn't just reveal the beauty of nature, it also demonstrates its hazards. The melting glaciers leave behind numerous dangers for mankind. Landslides and ice avalanches can occur along the sides as the retreating ice mass is no longer there to support the rock walls. Even the meltwater can be dangerous. All over the Alps, new lakes have formed. Some empty themselves in catastrophic floods that cascade down into the valleys with tremendous destructive force. The upper Stein Lake has not yet broken its banks. The lower one has done so twice. Not far from the Stein Glacier, meltwater brooks meander across a plain. Here, a mysterious, though small-scale disaster has occurred, a so-called crime of nature. This little meltwater pond is full of corpses. What carried off these frogs en masse? Was it a virus, perhaps? Or the skin fungus that has killed frogs all over the world? Creepy, insect larvae and fish have also fallen victim to the sinister killer. So what happened? The answer to the gruesome riddle proves that nature is not cruel, it is just appallingly indifferent. Right in the middle of the frogs' mating season, the meltwater pond suddenly froze solid. The creatures all suffocated. But the story does have a happy ending. Before they died, some frogs did actually manage to mate. Protected by the gelatinous frog spawn coating, many frog larvae survived the deadly frost. So in future, the Stein Glacier will still be home to frogs. The immense volumes of water in the Swiss Alps in the form of snow, ice, rain, standing and flowing water have shaped the mountains anew for millions of years. Water sculpts entire valleys in the rock. Water freezing in crevices and fissures bursts the stone. Rocks, stones and sand, so-called debris, swept along by water, help to form entire landscapes. In the course of time, this creates unique wonders of nature. Here, water demonstrates what it can do over thousands of years of gradual perseverance. During the Ice Age, the meltwater from the Aare glacier gouged out no fewer than 7 deep gorges in a rock plateau. One of these gorges is today the riverbed of the river Aare. For some, it's an eerie place. The gorge is said to have been the home of a mythical millipede-type dragon. The sheer rock walls rise up to 180 meters. At its narrowest point, it's just 1 meter wide. The Aare flows quite sedately through the gorge here, but meltwater from the high mountain regions can behave quite differently. The Trümmelbach, fed by the waters of the Jungfrau, Mönch and Eiger, has excavated no fewer than 10 waterfalls into the rock. Over 20,000 tons of debris every year have created a partly subterranean ravine through which the water rages with full force. But even in this whirling, churning chaos and infernal thundering, there are moments of poetic beauty. It's no surprise that this incredible landscape has inspired so many artists and writers. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle chose the Reichenbach Falls as the scene where his master detective, Sherlock Holmes, dies. The Reichenbach Falls, as he wrote in his story The Final Problem, is indeed a fearful place. The torrent, swollen by the melting snow, plunges into a tremendous abyss from which the spray rolls up. The shaft is an immense chasm lined by glistening coal-black rock and narrowing into a creaming, boiling pit of incalculable depth. And the thick, flickering curtain of spray, hissing forever upward, turns a man giddy with its constant whirl and clamour. No fewer than 72 waterfalls plunge into the Lauterbrunnen Valley below, each more impressive than the last. Glaciers milled the valley out of the stone. Its almost sheer rock walls are several hundred meters high. But the water of the Staubbach Falls doesn't always reach the bottom. Often it's completely dispersed by the wind. In the 1930s, John Ronald Royal Tolkien visited the Lauterbrunnen Valley. He was so impressed by it that it inspired him. In his Lord of the Rings trilogy, there is also a place that is surrounded by high rock walls with cascading waterfalls. Rivendell, the elven town. Once the water has left the mountains, all the roaring, booming and foaming is over. The white Lütschine flows quite tamely in the direction of the Aare. Since leaving the gorge, the Aare itself has become a long, peaceful river. This is partly due to its canalization. Malicious tongues claim that the Aare isn't actually a river, but rather a 288-kilometer-long production site for the energy sector. It has been dammed for numerous hydroelectric power stations, like this one on Lake Biel, which it flows through. It didn't always used to do that, though. It's forced to by a man-made canal. And then heads straight as a die towards the River Rhine. But despite the power stations and canalization, there are several places where the Aare also shows its real face. In nature reserves such as the Alte Aare wetlands, at least parts of the River Aare are allowed to flow as they wish. It's conservation with an ulterior motive. The wetlands provide a floodplain, protecting people and their villages from floods. Countless ponds and pools in this landscape are teeming with life. Some of the inhabitants might not be instantly recognizable to everyone, though. Few people get this close to tadpoles. Up in the mountains, it can sometimes take a year for tadpoles to develop into frogs. And then the baby frogs have to survive the hard winters. Below, on the Swiss plateau, it all goes much faster. Warm sun and plentiful food in the form of plant parts reduce the tadpole's transformation period to a couple of weeks. As soon as its legs have grown, the future frog can easily be identified. But the tadpole still has gills like a fish and cannot yet survive on land. Its final transformation goes against the current zeitgeist. It changes from being a vegetarian to a dedicated carnivore. One animal that vanished from Switzerland for a long time now turns up more often and leaves very obvious traces. During the day, it's rarely seen at all. One has to wait until after dark to catch a glimpse of it. The fact that beavers are sighted more frequently is the result of a successful reintroduction program. Since the 1950s, 141 beavers have been released into the wild. Today, they number over 3,000. They're notorious tree fellers. They can't climb, so they fell trees instead to get at their juicy leaves. If they think the water level in their territorial water is too low, they will build effective dams. That doesn't appeal to everyone. Beavers only eat plants, and they're not fussy. Anything green tastes good to them. Their diet consists of an astonishing 300 kinds of plants. Not a particularly sociable animal, beavers are either solitary or live in close family groups. Males and females pair for life. They're impossible to tell apart. Only beavers themselves recognize a male from a female. For nature, the beaver is a blessing. Where it builds dams and creates pools, the groundwater increases and plants can grow better. Their tree felling allows more light and warmth to reach the forest floor. And its pools are also valuable biotopes, teeming with life. The nature conservation area that this beaver has selected as its habitat looks like an impenetrable jungle. It's hard to believe that this jungle is a tiny island in the middle of an industrial area. Water creates landscapes in Switzerland that one wouldn't normally expect to find here otherwise. Moors. In the Entlebuch Biosphere Nature Reserve between Bern and Lucerne, there are more than 100 moors and upland bogs. They were created after the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago. Over the centuries, huge areas of bog were drained as human beings needed the land, or they extracted the peat for heating. But in Entlebuch, 2,000 hectares of moor was retained, a unique habitat. Inconspicuous, yet rather special, the alpine bluegrass has adapted to the brief alpine summer. It doesn't form seeds that have to go through the elaborate process of germination. The grass is viviparous and bears fully germinated seedlings, including greenery and roots. There's a creature hiding somewhere in this picture. This green huntsman spider is a female, as its completely green camouflage reveals. The males have a red stripe down their backs. Not all insect eaters have legs. The butterwort bears white or purple flowers. Larger creatures, such as the smooth newt, have no reason to fear the plant. But for insects, the leaves of the butterwort are a death trap. The plant digests the insects alive. The same goes for the sundew. It has sticky glands that it uses to catch its prey. The sundew relies on its carnivorous meals. It cannot get enough nutrients from the poor soil of the moor. Moors are very moist regions, formed among other things by rainwater that cannot drain away. In Entlebuch, a very different landscape has also been created by rainwater, not stagnant, but flowing. The rainwater has created a bizarre landscape out of the limestone mountain, But the Schrattenfluh wasn't formed like the gorges in the Alps by minute quartz particles in the water grinding the rock away. The Schrattenfluh was formed by chemistry. The slightly acid rainwater dissolved the limestone, creating fissures and grooves. The Schrattenfluh is as full of holes as Swiss cheese. Some 250 kilometers of caves have been discovered by researchers to date, but the Schrattenfluh is probably riddled with many more holes, shafts and tunnels. On the cave floor, a surprise: imprints of seashells and corals. Inconceivable that deep below the Earth's surface, many millions of years ago, this place once looked like this. For a long time, the question of where the leached rainwater actually flowed to remained a mystery. Some of it covers quite an impressive distance. It's transported by subterranean streams to Lake Thun, almost 20 kilometers away. Lake Thun is one of the nearly 1,500 lakes in Switzerland. Apart from the coldest mountain lakes, they're generally highly biodiverse habitats. Several Swiss lakes, including Lake Sempach here, are home to a highly controversial animal. It can turn fishermen and fish farmers red-faced with anger. Their accusation: the creature eats too many fish and is emptying the lake. The cormorant used to visit Switzerland as a migrating bird. It stayed a short while and then left. But increasingly, cormorants decided not to leave Switzerland. The number of breeding pairs has meanwhile risen to around 1,500. At Lake Sempach, there's a small colony nesting in 3 or 4 trees. Each nest holds between 2 and 4 chicks. There's a fair division of labor among cormorants. One adult bird guards the brood, keeping them warm in the cold and providing shade in the heat. The other adult bird tirelessly provides food. The young beg for food by nudging the adult bird's beak. The adult bird stores the fish it's caught in its throat pouch, which the chicks empty quite quickly. The biggest chick has the best chance of survival, because not every chick makes it. The smaller ones have to ensure that they don't get a raw deal on the food. Life in the breeding colony has one disadvantage. One can never be sure what will come one's way from above. Whether cormorants are actually emptying the lake hasn't been scientifically proven yet. But even if they were, they're unlikely to allow themselves to be chased away from Switzerland's lakes anytime soon. Slowly but surely, the Aare flows to its final destination. The further onwards it flows, the more densely populated the countryside. Little traditional villages, like picturesque Büren, dot its banks. Its passage is now largely channeled and controlled, but the Aare has 2 faces, one tame and predictable, the other wild and natural. Alongside the canal-like river, there are wildly romantic stretches many kilometers long. Finally, in Koblenz in Switzerland, the moment arrives. The Aare flows into the Rhine. There's something of an injustice here. The Aare actually carries a larger volume of water, so the Rhine ought to be a tributary of the Aare, not the other way round. A few kilometers upstream, the otherwise sedate River Rhine demonstrates that it is quite capable of a bit of drama. Although the mighty river at its source is rather more idyllic, almost like a little mountain stream. But the birds are well advised to stay close to the banks, because in the center of the river, there's all hell let loose. In summer, 600 cubic meters of water descends here every second, making the Rhine Falls one of the biggest waterfalls in Europe. Even though at 23 meters, it's far from being the highest. But the Rhine Falls at Schaffhausen are one of the most impressive natural wonders that Switzerland has to offer. The fact that this splendid phenomenon still exists is sheer luck. It's often been suggested that the Rhine should be made navigable along its entire length. The Rhine Falls would just have been in the way. But fortunately, these plans all came to nothing. Today, the Rhine Falls are no longer seen as a nuisance, but rather one of the most spectacular places in Europe, a sight not to be missed, either by day or by night. The passage of water through Switzerland is a journey through widely diverse, beautiful landscapes and splendidly pristine nature. All life depends on this water, also that of the people who drink it, irrigate their fields with it, or use it to generate power. Without the water from the Alps, life as we know it in Switzerland and in Europe would be impossible. So there is concern at the alpine winters becoming drier, the summers warmer, the breathtaking pace at which the glaciers are disappearing. But nature, finding refuge in so many places in a densely populated country like Switzerland and still flourishing, has a valuable lesson to pass on. Climate change will bring far-reaching changes, but nature will surely find a way to adapt.